It's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome to Fail Friday, the series where I either fix your baking fails, my baking fails, or I tell you how to avoid a fail. And today we are going to be talking about the horrible decorating errors that I made and the bad practices in decorating that I continued to make for a lot longer than I'd like to admit. So let's get into it. So when I first started decorating cakes, I have no idea why I did this or why I didn't do this, but I wouldn't re-whip any of my frostings. And honestly, looking back on the photos that I took of the cakes that I was so proud of, I just cringe a little bit because you can see the graininess in the frosting all along the side of the cake. The cake itself was actually decorated okay. It was smooth, but you can see the different granules of butter and sugar that kind of coagulated and they don't look right. On top of that, whipping your frostings also ensures that you have a super white, bright finish. And yeah, all of my cakes that I did not do this for have a very grainy, kind of gray tinge to them. So I don't know why, but it took me years and years to learn to re-whip my frostings. So whenever you are baking your cakes, and let's say you have some leftover frosting, even for royal icing, this applies as well, you need to make sure that you re-whip it. And you do need to re-whip it for a while. What you're doing when you're re-whipping it is you're reincorporating that air, and that air gives it that beautiful white finish. It also gives it a way better mouthfeel. If you're to actually eat a spoonful of frosting that you haven't re-whipped yet, it really tastes not so great, and it'll taste really over buttery. So you just need to make sure that you whip your frostings every single time. I have no idea why I didn't. The next thing that I would do, which would result in a lot of failure, is I would take the tiniest amount of water to apply different fondant appliques to cakes. I don't know, somewhere down the line I learned that you should just put a teeny tiny amount of water to adhere a large star to a fondant piece. Now, I also used to use water to apply things to buttercream, which is still kind of something that I do from time to time, but only if it's something small, if it's a smaller detail. Now, the reason why this is never going to work is because once that water dries, if there wasn't enough water applied to it, it's just going to pop off. Now, I think one of the reasons that I was using this tiny amount of water to adhere things to cakes is because I didn't want too much water to be applied or else it slides off your cake. And also it causes the fondant dye to kind of leach out if you use too much water. So I wanted to avoid leaching on cakes. But honestly, this really caused a lot of issues. Things would be popping off left and right. So what I ended up doing was I ended up switching. So if you've seen any of my cake tutorial videos now, you see I do a lot of steaming on cakes. I steam the fondant first and then I apply the applique instead. Also, if I'm applying something to buttercream, I switched my buttercream recipe. So I used to work with American buttercream all the time. And I've talked about how it really forms quite a crust on it. And so you don't get any stickiness at all when you touch buttercream that's been in the fridge like that. Now I use Italian meringue buttercream. And although it does crust over a slight bit, if I were to take it out of the fridge, even overnight, I can still take a piece of fondant and stick it onto the cake without having everything mushing everywhere. It just really adheres to the cake super nicely. The other thing I also did to fix that whole issue of using the teeniest amount of water on my cakes is I would take a little bit of Tylose powder, mix it in with water to form kind of an edible paste. And then that way I could really adhere larger pieces onto cakes firmly without things popping off. The next next thing I would do is, for some reason, I would just be so overbooked and I would be so overworked. So what I would end up doing is I would be leaving orders till the last minute because I literally had no other choice. And a lot of times I would come home and I'd want to sleep instead of doing an order. So what would end up happening is I would be doing cookie orders last minute. Now, cookie orders last minute now would be no problem. But back then, I did not use my dehydration trick. So I would just wait for cookies to dry. Now, if you guys know anything about doing cookies, icing cookies, even with royal icing, which is faster drying than a glaze, it takes a really long time if you're not using a dehydrator of any sort. I'd say it probably takes a full overnight rest for it to actually be hard enough for you to stack. So what I would end up doing is I would just kind of hope for the best. And if I had to package the cookies when they were still not fully set, I would just try to puff up the wrapper and slide it in and hope that they would not get crushed. Yeah, that's terrible. Now that I think about it, I'd be pretty mad if I received those cookies. So what I did to fix that was I take them and I put them into the dehydrator now, or I put them into the oven, and that way they set like that. Also, I'm a lot faster at orders now, so the prospect of having to finish a lot of orders at once is not as bad because I'm a lot quicker, so it's not going to take as long as it used to. The next thing I would do is I wouldn't use any cake tools. Yeah, for some reason, I only used my fingers for a number of years. Now again, there's nothing innately wrong with this, but it really decreases efficiency. So I did eventually start using my cake tools. In fact, I don't even know how I made flowers before without using a cake tool. Do you need the fanciest of cake tools? Absolutely not. But you do need some sort of cake tool, and the balling tool is one of my favorites. Trying to make fondant figures or standing fondant items without any Tylose powder or gum paste or modeling chocolate. So if you've ever used something like modeling chocolate, for example, it holds its shape a lot better because it has chocolate in it, which helps solidify things. It also melts a little bit more easily, so that's why I tended to steer clear of that anyway. Gum paste also holds its shape faster as well. Fondant, of those three mediums, takes a little while longer for things to set. In fact, we used to wait overnight or like 6 days for fondant figures to get done before I started realizing there were so many other options to get standing figures or figures that had a lot of intricacy in them, and there's so many ways to fix it. So one of the things that I started doing was I started using Tylose powder mixed in with my fondant. This speeds up the fondant drying process like crazy. Fondant really doesn't need overnight to dry at all. When you use the Tylose powder, it is super quick. The other thing is I wouldn't use any wires or lollipops or foam balls or anything in my people. So whenever I was trying to create fondant people, their necks would start sinking in and they just never quite looked right. And the reason being because I did not use the proper supports inside of those characters. So that caused a lot of issues. I will show you a picture right here of this horse that I made. Now the horse looks adorable and I am not over exaggerating. It literally took me 4 hours because that's what happens when you don't use Tylose and you don't use proper supports in your characters. Speaking of support, I used to never support any of my cakes. So let's back that up for a sec. I did support them, but I did not do it well. I think I've made well over 50 to 100 cakes where there's no supporting dowel in the center of like a 2-tiered or 3-tiered. When I sent off a cake to a really far away place, it's like 3 hours away, and my friend was taking it and driving with it, and it was 3 tiers. It's this cake right here, and it looks like a nice cake, nothing wrong with it, but I didn't put a supporting dowel in it. How it made it to the destination in 30-degree weather, 30 degrees Celsius weather is beyond me. I have no idea how it made it on somebody's lap all the way because there was no supporting dowel in it. Had I put a supporting dowel, there would have been no issue and nobody would have been panicking. And I'm embarrassed to say that I really only learned that the last time I was working for my friend in the commercial bakery, which was only a couple years ago, and I had been making cakes for a long time already. The next thing I would do is I would improperly package things. So, you spend a ton of time working and crafting these beautiful, beautiful pieces of edible artwork that you would think I would use the proper packaging, but I did not. I would just place things in. And I guess I kind of picked this up from the bakery that I worked at. However, I will say that because their product is bigger and it's more sized exactly to the boxes that they buy, it works for them. But for me, my product was a bit smaller and I used different boxes, so it never really worked. But I kept trying to be like, oh, it's going to be fine. And literally, nobody really ever complained about packaging. But as somebody who's transported a lot of her own baked goods places, I can definitely tell that my packaging was not up to par. So in truth, I'd actually never really fixed this, but only because I haven't had opportunities to sell things the way I was selling before and having to put these orders into boxes. So I think now if I were to package things, I would do them a lot better and a lot differently. So I hope those baking practice fails that I used to commit will help you avoid a fail, and hopefully you have learned from my mistakes about what not to do when cake decorating and cookie decorating and selling your baked goods. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm still uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to submit your baking fail so I can help you fix your fail by next Friday. Bye!